Acompañarnos hoy acá. Tengo que usar el micrófono porque hay un streaming en vivo, entonces la gente que nos escucha en streaming también, para que compartan sus dudas. Y si tienen algunas preguntas, yo voy a estar pendientes de sus preguntas y de las personas que nos acompañan también en streaming. Hoy tenemos a Graham Plumb. Thank you, Graham, for sharing this time with us. Graham is an awesome interactive designer with tons of experiences that he's willing to share with us. So any doubts you have, anything you want to know, I think we are in the right place and with the right mindset to ask questions and being able to share what we do also. Thank you so much for sharing this time. And also, Graham, thank you very much and welcome to Central.
Hello, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. First thing I want to say is I'm very sorry I don't speak better Spanish, but I understand you speak good English, so I'm grateful for that. And thank you, Roberto, for this invitation. I am, as Roberto says, a professor of interaction design. I teach at this school here in California. And this moment, being here right now, is quite special for me because I've been coming to Mexico for about 20 years. I've been a designer for about 20 years. I've been a teacher for about 7 years. And so for me, this is a great moment to bring all of those things together. So I hope this is of interest. I was thinking about what I might talk about today, and I was thinking that I could tell you a bit about the story about how I became an interaction designer. I actually came through a fine arts education. So I studied sculpture, then I became a freelance model maker, and eventually an interaction designer. I also thought it might be of interest if I share with you some of the projects that my students have done at CCA in California, a little bit about my methodology and the sort of principles that I teach, which include some of the principles that I practice as a professional interaction designer. So that refers to what I call socially immersive media. So apart from being a teacher, I have these two lives of being both an artist and a designer. And I say that, but I feel a bit awkward saying that because I don't like to necessarily create this barrier between the two. I like to work on design projects that have a sort of artistic quality to them. And my design practice involves actually a lot of engineering and the same kinds of tools that I would use as a designer. So there's not necessarily a clear binary between those. These two projects I chose because both of them were created back when, like you, I was at school. And if there's any sort of message, I guess, to this talk is that my experience has been that when you're at school, you have this amazing opportunity to take risks, to experiment. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you end up creating something that may stay with you throughout your career. And it may take years before you realize that that project was something that inspired you, that has been with you all of this time. But these are my two examples of that. So the first project is a little left of field, let's say. It's an artwork I made about 20 years ago. And I wanted to share it with you because this piece began life in Mexico, actually in Acapulco. I was on vacation, and the material, I'll get to that in a moment, so let's say began life in Acapulco. I call it Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which is named after a song by Noel Coward, and it talks about the madness of dogs and Englishmen because we go out in the midday sun. Okay, so I don't know if this stereotype is familiar over here, but the English have a reputation for going out into the sun and getting sunburned and getting very red. And so this piece is actually made from the sunburnt skin that was accidentally burnt off my backside, off my butt. Now, it was a complete accident. It wasn't done intentionally. I was in Acapulco, and at the time I was at art school, and I was reading about the problems of exhibiting non-Western art in the West. And I was becoming aware of my sort of colonial history as well. It's not something British, back in the day when I was at school, British history lessons really spoke much about. So the piece is actually made from the skin that I burnt off my butt. I went to a nudist beach somewhere in Acapulco. I completely overdid it. And I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. This is absurd. What a fool. So really, this piece is a joke on my sort of post-colonial identity as a stupid tourist. I call it a tribute to the alleged idiot. You can see right there, just about, there is England. That's about 12 millimeters in height. At the time, I was also an architectural model maker. And so I had a great sort of tendency to get into detail. The piece has won a competition and has, for the last 4 years, has been cited at the French consul's residence in San Francisco. So here it greets ambassadors and consuls as they come to France. There it is under just over a picture of Macron. And that, by the way, is the French consul. So anyway, moving back to my experience as a teacher, I thought it'd be interesting just to say a few words about CCA. The school is one of the oldest art schools in America. It's been around, I think, for about 120, 125 years. It's located in 2 locations. Or rather, it was located in 2 locations. It began in Oakland, which is across the bay. I think it was founded by Frederick Mayer. It has some beautiful old buildings. It's very green. And the other location is San Francisco. And for several decades now, we've had this problem of trying to create interdisciplinary studios, classes that can work between art and design, but we have this division, this geographical division. And so our whole timetable has been based on students being shipped on buses backwards and forwards between San Francisco and Oakland. So our president embarked on a campus unification scheme in which we have recently sold the Oakland campus and are building a $150 million extension to the back of the CCA campus right there on the back. So you can see this is the original CCA. Over on the right is the campus expansion. Over here we have student dormitories, and over there is Adobe, which are our neighbors. This is a picture of architects rendering. The architects are studio gang. And so we're trying to retain this sort of outdoors quality that Oakland had. Hopefully there'll be bigger trees eventually in this space, but you get the picture. We have about 25 undergraduate programs that are in fine arts and design, and about 11 graduate programs. We also have an MDes program and several other programs that combine different disciplines. So I'm really excited about the way bringing these 2 schools together, what that will mean for the future of CCA as we combine art and design in the same space. Excuse me a second. So I teach undergraduate and graduate interaction design. This is a list of the classes that we offer on the undergraduate program. Some of these classes, it depends who is teaching, but these classes appear one semester and they may disappear the next, but this is a sort of general picture. I teach students as they're entering the program, Intro to Interaction Design or IXD Foundations. A big passion of mine is prototyping, so enabling students to think through their hands and to actually test their ideas and build experiences and find out whether they really do work or not. I also have a great interest in immersive experience design. I'll talk more about that in a moment, which is related to story as well, the ways in which we build stories, tell stories about the people we're designing for, the stories we tell about ourselves as designers. I'm especially interested in natural user interfaces, which I'll come to in a moment. A little bit of game development, VR, XR, electronics coding. And a big passion too is helping students find their mojo in the last two semesters of their senior thesis. Generally speaking, we've used this double diamond approach to design. I'm sure you're familiar with this model. You've seen it before in probably many other forms. Some people call this design thinking, user-centered design, double diamond. It has many different names. There are many different diagrams. I find this a useful design methodology, partly because I think it enables students to see things from somebody else's point of view, to develop an empathy that goes beyond their immediate circumstances or world experience. So the way this works is, we will teach students methodologies for primary and secondary research, how to analyze that research and to find opportunity areas. And then my real passion is then enabling students to realize these concepts through prototyping methodologies. I prefer this diagram over that one because it's a bit messier. I like the fact that it's not as clear cut. It doesn't just go from left to right. In my experience, design is a much, much messier process. You can't sort of lay it out as clearly as that. And my real focus is in that sort of ideation and implementation side, partly because I've worked so long in industry, and that's really where the focus I found has been. So following on from that, one of the things I love to teach students is to do just enough prototyping. What I mean by that is that prototyping is expensive. It takes a lot of human resources, sometimes a lot of material resources or spatial resources. And so my goal is to help students decide what is the kind of prototype that I need to build, okay? What is the problem that I'm actually trying to solve here? And once I know that, what kind of prototype is appropriate for this moment? It's partly due to economy that we do this, okay? It's partly because there usually isn't enough time to prototype, okay, or user test. But it's also partly because I find that when I'm working with clients that you need to pick the right level of prototype so that they understand where we are in the design process. I try not to make things that are too high fidelity if I can help it. There are moments, obviously, where you need to impress a client, okay, and there's that temptation to do something awesome. But at the same time, I'd much rather have a client that is more of a partner in this process, who works with me in the design process, and so therefore is on board with this level of fidelity that we're working on. So just briefly, on the left here, students are prototyping a tangible music player. Okay, so instead of using their mobile phones, they are making physical objects, using tokens and widgets and bits of paper, sticky notes, really to sort of get a sense of how your hands can be useful in the way you think through a problem, how you engage a menu, how you make choices, how you develop a new mental model of interaction through building a prototype. There is a mobile phone in that picture, but it's there because the students are playing music to simulate what would happen as you interact with those pieces of paper. Okay. The central picture was just a fun experiment. Here the students are embodying sensors. So I say to them, okay, you're a robot, you have to get from this side of the room to this. I put some chairs in their way, and I ask them to pick some sensors, and then we find out whether they can really work their way across the room, or whether they fail. So it's just a simple way of learning about the capacities, limitations, possibilities of using sensors. The last project here, slightly higher fidelity, but this is a project I did with students working with Arduino and Macs. Here they're actually creating electromechanical musical instruments. So you can see there's a guitar there and a machine for picking the notes. So for me, like a good project is one that is, essentially fun. Okay, there has to be an element of fun to it. There's a kind of framework for exploring a media or medium, but there's also an opportunity for students to go in their own direction and create something that feels like they're solving a problem they want to solve. Slightly higher fidelity prototyping would include building virtual reality apps. This one was with the Apple software. I think it's called, I forget what it's called. I forget what it's called. Can anyone help me? Apple Reality Composer. Yeah. The one in the center is using processing and Reactable, which is an open hardware system. Students were building, again, a tangible interface in which they put objects into the center of these disks. And the goal here was to create basically a tool for chefs to plan a menu. So each of those tokens represents a flavor. And what they're doing is developing a flavor profile. So each dish represents a different dish in a sequence of dishes in a meal. And they're actually building a flavor profile. It's quite a novel approach to planning a menu. On the right is ASL for Siri by Elaine Choi. I have an interest, I mentioned, in creating gestural interfaces. And in this project, Elaine was thinking, well, where might a gestural interface make sense? And she immediately thought that Siri would be a good space, because Siri obviously can only respond to sound, and if you can't hear, then you can't really communicate with Siri. So this is a version of Siri in which you can make gestures, and Siri will respond to you through the camera. Students go in all sorts of directions from CCA. We are located in Silicon Valley, so there are a lot of opportunities for them there. But students often go abroad internationally. We have quite an international group of students. This project here, Project Shasta, is by one of my students, Sam Anderson. He very quickly became a lead experience designer at Adobe. And this is something you can try out today. I think it's in beta format right now, beta format. But basically, this is a tool for recording podcasts, and it uses artificial intelligence to reduce background noise and give you a really good quality sound recording. It also has a beautiful interface, a really simple to follow interface.
Hey there, I'm Sam Anderson.
Okay, that's enough from Sam. This project is Ash and Weiwei. These are two students of mine. I'm sure you guys have seen Figma before and used a lot of Figma, especially over the pandemic, right? I think this is kind of a pandemic project in a way, in response to that. And I think what they really responded to was how kind of cold Figma feels, right? There's no kind of like warmth to it. So they wanted to create a comforting, warm space that worked a bit like Figma and had the brilliant idea of including video as well. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly moving between Zoom and Figma, and like I have all these screens everywhere. Here you can actually bring your friends into the conversation, into the workspace, and you get that real human connection. And they have this fantastic library of like cool little things you can stick on each other and stickers and stuff to make it much more sort of sociable. So if you want to check that out, that is at www.sprout.place. This student, Tara, I had as a graduating senior, and this was honestly one of the most intellectually compelling projects I've ever had. And I remember going into conversations with her and like actually finding it hard to keep up with her imagination. She was so strong. This was at the time when Donald Trump had just become president, and he was tweeting all of this BS, okay, over Twitter. And so Tara was really motivated to ask, how can we check the, keep Twitter, actually, let me read out what she actually says. I have my glasses here. She says it much better than I. Oh, yes, so information is fragile. Incentivized by the attention economy on social media, information can easily turn into misinformation. Misinformation can have a detrimental effect on people's safety, democracy, and the public perception of news and science. However, using facts and figures to convince people is not enough to solve this problem. Misinformation not only stems from the incentive structure of social media, but also the ritualistic aspect of information communication. So this project began with basically designing a button to Twitter, and from that button, you can see this diagram on the left, Tara imagined the journey that people could take as this information was checked through different kinds of news verifying sources. It was a really cool project, became a primer. Primer is a speculative conference that we have in San Francisco, so it became a finalist there. Okay, so this, I'm going to switch tack again. This is a question that I like to ask students in my natural user interface class. Why should we be designing interfaces that make a better fit of human capabilities and their context of use? And I begin with this slide here. This is something that you've probably seen before. Okay, it seems to be an international phenomena. And when I see people behaving like this, I think that this is more a consequence of the way we've designed technology than something that is innate to human behavior. And so I think that the technology that we are designing as designers, we have a responsibility basically to think about how our interfaces, the way we serve up data, the way we create a sort of physics of interaction between people, how that actually has an impact on social behavior. This is another slide I show my students. The image on the left represents a sort of mapping of human sensitivity, okay? Although it has been somewhat modified, I think. But you can see we have big hands, big lips, ear, and we can hear, good sense of smell. The image on the right, though, represents the way that computers see us, okay? We basically are tapping with our fingers, moving a mouse around. There's some interaction with the camera. Sometimes we talk to them, okay? But you can see that there's a huge disparity between these two mental models. So with that in mind, our students try to think about ways that make a better use of natural human capabilities. So that includes our kinesthetic memory, our spatial reasoning, the fact that basically we're super evolved to use our hands in very complex ways. And our hands are very much part of the way we think. So a couple of projects that represent that here, I think I showed you this just a moment ago, but tangible interfaces are very interesting, not just because they enable you to place information spatially and to make conscious decisions and remember where things were, but because they're also very social experiences. I love interactive tables partly because you can maintain eye contact with the person you're working with while you're also interacting with the interface. So tangible user interfaces are very good at collaborative type problems where somebody needs to lean in, take control of that interface, and add to the conversation. The image on the right it represents a project by Colin Chan. This is just something we did last semester. And this is basically a smoke and mirrors representation of a prototype that he built in Figma. The concept is someone wants to work out. They don't want to be touching their phone. They want to be able to gesture at it rather than get down into that sort of touch level of detail. And then these are all projects. These are all tangible interfaces. All projects based on building tools for collaboration. Okay, so the one on the top left is a collaborative tool for an editor, a copywriter, a graphic designer working together on developing a magazine. The one on the top right is a project management tool. Interesting because it's vertical. Here they're designing a music app. They're using a familiar conceptual model of organizing information, but they're adding physical objects to it, which enables all sorts of new kinds of affordances. I talk a lot about affordances, signifiers, constraints in my classes. I'm a big fan of Don Norman and his book, Design of Everyday Things. The one on the bottom left is quite an artful music player using tokens to represent soundtracks, interfacing with different elements that can be used to create playlists, share music. And the one on the bottom right is a tool for a group of people wanting to go on vacation and wanting to decide what the best schedule would be, what would be the fairest way of planning a vacation together. Okay, changing tack again, going back to my story. I mentioned that between being studying sculpture and discovering interaction design, for about 6 years, I was a freelance model maker working in London. I see a couple of heads of recognition. Like I think you know what model makers are, right? Still, okay. There aren't many of us left since computers sort of took over the scene. But basically, I went around different designers, architects, product design companies in London, and my role was to kind of just build prototypes, build maquettes, artist maquettes. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was kind of like a design education through the back door, because I got to see how designers actually work when they drop their guard and they're actually working under pressure. The person I last worked for was Ron Arrow down at the bottom here. I made 20 fiberglass chairs for his Milan furniture show. Ron designed the form and I designed all of the finishes. And it gave me a lot of confidence, actually, that I could work for a designer like Ron Arad. But I have to say, I was also, at this point, really frustrated with constantly realizing other people's ideas. I wanted to design my own stuff. So Ron became a professor of furniture and industrial design at the RCA, Royal College of Art, and I then went on to the RCA, partly because I saw this project there. This is also a chair. It doesn't look very comfortable as a chair, but this chair has legs that walk. And not only does it have legs that walk, it also has an attitude, right? Because if you're not nice to this chair, it'll actually walk away from you. And to me, that was amazing because I'd just been making chairs, right, which exist in 3 dimensions, X, Y, Z, but this chair could do something else. And that was kind of mind-blowing to me. Like you could actually have a behavior. And once you have a behavior, you have the opportunity for an interaction, right? You have this opportunity for the chair to do something, the person to respond, the chair to do something in response. And that seemed to me very, very rich. So I applied to the Royal College of Art. I was fortunate to get in. They gave us a desk and they gave us a computer that looked like this, which probably dates it a little bit. But this is, basically, this took up most of my desk. Okay, so you get a desk, it's about this big, the computer's like this big, and I was like, what do I do with this? I come from sculpture. I had this relationship with materials and materiality, But now I looked at this screen, and screens were, I have to say, a little bit different to how they are now. You could actually see the pixels back then. You could see like this black mesh grid. And it felt like everything I do is going to end up coming through this filter. It's always going to look the same, feel the same in some way. And it felt like a real frustration. So I set to work trying to reimagine the screen. Okay, so if I don't want to use this medium, I need to come up with something else to express myself with. So I basically put together a collection of materials. Okay, I played with sort of chemistry kits. I worked with a chemist. I had an interest in making this flat 2D image, bringing it into my space, making it something that was much more visceral, that I almost felt like I could touch. And so I developed this project called the Reactive Cube. It is basically a cube filled with water and a special oil that actually will capture light as you project through it. And as it does so, each of the pixels, you can see how widely spaced they are here, each of the pixels actually captures the light and becomes extruded. So I'm, in effect, actually capturing the end of a projection. I'm actually giving that end of the projection a form. So if you project, say, a square, it becomes like a column, or a circle becomes a cylinder. So I had this like interesting new display medium, okay, but then I was like, well, I'm doing interaction design. How do I interact with this thing, okay? The last thing I wanted to do was like connect it to a keyboard and mouse. That didn't feel right, okay? It had to be something that felt like it was of the medium. And so what I came up with was basically direct interaction, using my body as the way of interacting with it. So this was really my first natural user interface. I'll just play you a little bit of this video. So here you can see that I can gesture with my hand, and depending on the shape and movement of my hand, it'll create a different kind of light drawing in the space. So I call this Shazam, okay? You make a Shazam and you get light. It actually feels kind of magical, as though this light is actually coming out of your fingertips. And actually quite empowering as well. That's the other thing. Removing this sort of hunk of plastic between you and the experience is actually very exciting. It feels like an extension to your body. Here's another one. So here you point at it and it'll draw this line. And then if you wiggle your finger around, it'll actually follow the flow of your finger. So fast forward a few years from here, when I graduated from school, I really had no idea what I was going to go into. I don't think we were as well supported in career advice, but I did have a good professor who suggested that museum design might be a good space, partly because museums deal with phenomena, and also because museums are always on the lookout for new forms of interaction. No museum ever wants to be the same as other museum. So I got to work in a very interdisciplinary practice, working with writers, 3D designers, sound designers. Projects in London include the London Transport Museum. I've worked on, I've lost track, but probably over 100 different museum-related projects over the years. Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, and so on. Because of this opportunity to work for museums, I'd never really focused on one particular medium. So I think of myself as platform agnostic. So I have designed apps, designed gesture-based experiences. The one on the bottom right uses physical objects, another interactive table. The focus has been on museums, but I've also worked in the education space, entertainment space, corporations, corporate lobbies, and also healthcare. With all of these projects, it kind of, coming from so many directions, it can get confusing as to what are your core fundamentals here. The thing that I keep coming back to is this simple concept, that in any interactive experience, there's usually just these three elements. There's a form of input, there's some kind of processing, and there's an output. What makes the interactive experience, though, is this loop, okay, this feedback loop. If it doesn't have that feedback loop, it's not interactive, it's a reactive experience. So with that in mind, I was able to imagine experiences that have different forms of input. So here, this is for a science museum in Hawaii, and these visitors are doing quasi-scientific experiments representing the science that goes on at the science museum. But they're able to actually touch the specimens. They're embedded in clear blocks of resin with RFID chips embedded in the back. And so they can pick up these objects, place them on the table, and actually move them around and examine them. So here, this child is doing a simple taxonomy exercise, identifying the specimen just by looking at it, noting how many wings it has got before deciding what it is. And the great thing about that is that the object, which is why we go to museums in the first place, is to engage with these objects, is something you can actually handle, you can actually touch, you can get close up to it. But it also manages to combine this digital layer of information. So the object isn't in a case anymore with the label down here. The two have been brought together. On another scale, let me turn this down here. This is for the GSX conference. Again, this is a form of tangible interface, you could say, or sorry, a natural interface, natural user interface. But here, the goal was to get executives to have some fun at a conference, okay, which can be quite challenging. But we basically created a giant game of Pong using a familiar mental model. Basically, teams team up, and they've got to direct this ball around the space. So going back to these sort of fundamental concepts, I think a lot of interactive experiences are based on this kind of model. Okay, so if you've ever played a computer game or used Photoshop, this is what you're doing. You're basically, it's you, the human, interacting with the computer. Okay, which is satisfying up to a degree. It's a form of interaction. I think more satisfying is this kind of model where the machine acts as a conduit between people, okay? So somehow a multiplayer game is more interesting than a single player game because you're playing somebody else and you're dealing with their psychology at the same time. These days, this is more the kind of model, okay? It's through our mobile phones. But this is what we're thinking about is how do we create interactive experiences that build a certain kind of quality of interaction between two different people. I think more interesting than that is this kind of model where you have many people joining in the experience at the same time. So this diagram represents at the center some kind of immersive experience. The people around it are the participants standing within some kind of interactive zone. But beyond that, what's interesting about this model is that you can create a performative space in which other people then join in. Most people are quite edgy about actually performing, right, in front of strangers. But once they see somebody actually performing and having fun, they're much more likely to step in and become part of that performative experience. So I've been designing these kinds of immersive experiences for about 7-8 years with a company called Sony Interactive in San Francisco. I was their creative director for all of that time. And we designed interactive walls, interactive tables, floors, surfaces. And a lot of the time we use this concept of actually using people's shadow as the interface. So we would put a projector and a camera on one side. The projector would project light, and people would see their silhouette. And what's interesting about a silhouette, as opposed to seeing your own video image, is that it's less embarrassing, yet you still feel an association with it, like you own your silhouette, right? We all recognize our silhouette. So it actually is a very effective means of engaging people in a performative space. Scott wrote a paper in 2009 called Social Immersive Media, Pursuing Best Practices for User Interface Camera Projector Exhibits. And in it, he outlines 4 principles. So Scott, I should mention, is a multimedia artist, and he applied, or rather evolved, these principles out of his art. When I joined him, I took these principles and applied them to museums, science museums, cultural museums, and other kinds of projects. But very briefly, for something to be actually socially immersive, it needs to have a sort of continuous experience so that people can enter and leave at any time. Okay, so having a discrete start and end actually is kind of a barrier to engagement, or can be a barrier. It should also be socially scalable, which means that it should actually get better as more people join and not worse, okay? Which is quite challenging, which means being super clear about who has agency. Maybe agency moves from one person to another, okay, but making that transparent to people. It helps if it's viscerally interactive, so not having that sort of plastic physical controller that I mentioned previously. One of the best ways of interacting with something that is socially immersive is just to use your own body. So people already know how to use their body. So our job as software developers and designers is to read that, understand that, expect that, like anticipate how people would move given the situation. And finally, suspension of disbelief, okay, which is common, I think, to any kind of immersive experience. But we try not to include any on-screen instructions, okay? So again, it can be challenging, like how do you explain to people what are you meant to do without reading a label? But if you add a label, it immediately takes people out of this world that you've put them in. So my approach is always to start simple, give them something easy to do, give them confidence in that moment, give them feedback, and then move on to something slightly more complex. So it becomes like a sort of cascading snowball, sort of rolling down a hill in its complexity. I have different projects I could share with you, but I'm just going to share with one. This was something I did towards the end of my tenure at SNIBI. We discovered that hospitals are actually a really good place for socially immersive media, mainly because they're really scary places, and especially children's hospitals. Kids don't want to be there, families don't want to be there. They're very uncomfortable, very sterile spaces. And fortunately, some hospitals, as they sort of have the budgets to revamp and improve, are thinking about this experience that people have. And so very often in the lobby, there'll be something there that actually sets the tone for the kind of experience someone might have at a hospital. So this is an interactive wall. It's probably about 30 feet wide, I think. You can see that there are Kinect cameras based in the center here. And basically, the idea here is that you grow your own garden. So you interact with this garden. You combine seeds that are floating through the air. You plant them. You water them by capturing rain with your bodies. You deflect sunshine. And as you grow these plants, these animals start to emerge. The animals then feed on the food. And basically, the garden keeps growing. This was a larger version of it, about twice that size. And hopefully, if this links, let me see. Yeah, here we go. So one of the things I found with creating these immersive spaces is that you can't like in a film. I think some of you may be film students, right? In a film, you can cut from one scene to another, but with an immersive space, you can't really do that, okay? Unless you sort of jump to a different space. So the technique I found of like progressing the narrative is to bring characters into the space to have an effect on people, to interact with people, to draw the story along. So this guy here, the little green guy, I call him the chromakin, he will transform people into flying creatures. They become avatars that can then fly around the scene. The wall was also designed to change at night. So we have the sort of bioluminescent display. That's so that the hospital's inpatients got a different kind of experience. And that's the full length of it. But the real sort of star of the show were the plants. We had this amazing character designer, Cliff Mueller, who created these characters, animated characters. Here you can see, actually, this is Cliff controlling one of the birds with his body flying around. And this kind of gets at the sort of underlying principles. So a bit like the way DNA works, when you combine different pieces of code, you can come up with a sort of third version. And so that was our way of basically creating a wall that was constantly evolved. So will always change depending on when you came in to see it. Okay, so I'm coming to the end here. I'm going to end with a project I'm currently working on. I'm actually on sabbatical right now, so technically I should be working on this right now. But this is a project, I call it the magnetic letterpress. It's also an immersive installation, and it comprises of 2 parts. I'm going to need my hands for this, so let me put these down. So the first part is a horizontal surface that is a black mirror. But the mirror is made from magnetic oil, ferrofluid. It was a substance, I think, developed by NASA for propelling liquids around in subgravity conditions. And the machine you see below it, there are 10 machines here. These are basically electromechanical devices that move rare earth magnets up and down on pistons. So what I've done is created basically a magnetic font, I call it. So you can see the arrangement. It's basically a hexadecimal display. And by moving the magnets up and down, what happens is the oil reacts to that magnetic field. And a bit like the way iron filings gather around a magnet on paper, you have the same effect, but you get this peculiar surface tension between the way the liquid wants to behave and the way the magnetic pieces of metal, tiny little pieces of metal, want to line up. So that's one part of it, and then it got more complicated. I decided it wasn't enough, so I created another layer on top of it, which is basically a large rear projection screen just above your head height. And the way this works is because this is hard to describe, but because the projection is up here and the oil is down here, what you're seeing is a reflection that is down here, okay, sort of way below your feet. And so you get this effect of like peering into a void. People have described it as a sort of sense of vertigo. It's a bit like looking into a sort of Oculus, but without the headset, okay? You're sort of peering into this void. And so what I'm currently working on is developing sequences that use both of these technologies in combination together. So I've been working with a friend to develop a software that combines these timelines, the video, and the sequencer. And there you can kind of see the reflection in the oil. So probably the best way to show this is just to sort of look at it on my website here. I'm developing this in a series of stages. The first stage that I'm sort of transitioning out of has been really to try and find out what the expressive potential of this machine is, okay? So I've built it, now I have to figure out how to work with it, and I need to figure out what kinds of tone capabilities does it have in terms of telling story. So I'm going to end with a couple of video clips that give you some sense of this. The first one is purely experimenting with the reflection in response to the form. So I might have to have some sound here. So this is very abstract. Just pause that there. So you can see that you can see there's a relationship between the two. But the piece I want to end with gets closer to where I'm going with this. I see this as a platform for telling stories that are related to climate, to the violence of petrochemical violence, stories that are connected to carbon tangentially. I have to say I'm still working on the structure, but I imagine that what I'll be doing in the future is basically bringing together a series of interviews. And so this next piece shows you, this is a poem, by the way, but this shows you the method that I'll be using as I capture those interviews. The poem, sorry, is by Bay Area poet Jane Hirschfield, and recited by my friend Gio.
Let them not say, not see it. We saw. Let them not say, we did not hear it. We heard. Let them not say, they did not taste it. We ate. We trembled. Let them not say it was not spoken, not written. We spoke. We witnessed with voices and hands. Let them not say we did nothing. We did not enough. Let them say, as they must say something, a kerosene beauty. It burned. Let them say, we warmed ourselves by it, read by its light, praised, and it burned.
So I think I wanted to end with this and begin with the skin piece and the cube because, as I said at the beginning, that I think that the work you do now as students somehow will find its way through to your careers later. And when I look at this now, I can see a connection with the skin piece. It's the oil that has a history, has a material history that becomes part of the narrative. But I can also see connections with the cube piece as well, that computers, computation, great for building tools that help us get through our everyday lives. But they also have this facility for creating these poetic experiences as well. So for me, this piece sort of brings together both of those sides. But yes, that's how I wanted to end. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
So we have a time for questions, if anybody has a question. No?
Well, I feel like, of course, for all of these projects, you need to have your narrative behind what you are doing really straight. And I think something that sometimes get lost in the moment of doing something interactive. How do you keep going the narrative? How do you justify? How do you justify your interactive design with the narrative? How do you make sure that it stays within the line and is not lost? The reason why you're doing that.
I think I understand what you. Yeah, it's there's a I know answer to that and an I don't know and I'm figuring it out answer to that. Okay, and I think that my experience as a designer has been that the narrative comes to you or you discover it with the client, and really you're trying to find a medium that communicates with with its museum visitors, for example. Communicates that story in a way that they remember and that they can actually engage with. Okay, so the choice of technology is really important there. So I think a lot about the sort of the scale of the interaction. Okay, should it be very intimate, just between you and it? Should it be something that involves two or more people? Should it involve a whole group of people? And what the differences are there. But with the artwork, it's more of a struggle because I'm trying to come from a place of creating mediums that then enable a certain kind of storytelling, okay? And I don't want to be didactic in saying that this is the story, okay? I think that I'm interested in discovering people's stories and representing those, but I want people to sort of lean in and enable them to give their own interpretation of what is happening there too. So I didn't talk much about the sort of the oil piece, the magnetic letterpress, but there I see that there might be a possibility to shift between the very clearer story, but also the more poetic between the two. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
How do you find the resources to finance all of this?
Good question. Yeah. So I'm British, right? And I'm living in America. And it makes it very difficult to get artist grants because most of them for Americans, and the only ones for Brits are generally for Brits in Britain. So most of my funding has come out of my own pocket. So the work that I do as a designer has actually funded buying materials. Time is something else, though. So that is a precious resource. But as I say, this is I think one of the reasons why I'm attracted to teaching is that it enables you to have that time and to actually invest. It encourages you to invest your time and to create that resource for yourself. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm afraid there's no magic answer. It is something I want to look into more, though, is like where to find those funding opportunities. But it's a different kind of work as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I feel like I'm a creative computing student, and I feel like you said, sometimes we get so involved in computers, in the screen, and we work all day on that. So I think even more now, we get confused and we say like, this is what we do. And so how would you, like the project you showed us, how would you force yourself to think more like, I don't know, integrate interactions, more human in your work?
I didn't need to force myself, I think. Okay, so my first experience of interaction was going to the Royal College of Art degree show in 1999. And back then, I was completely unaware of what interaction design was. I went in just as an experience. And I noticed that there was a kind of a patina to all of the work that I saw, right? So, like bronze has like a finish to it. I felt it was the same way with what I was seeing. And it wasn't until I looked into it later that I realized that patina was Macromedia Director 8 and Flash. Okay, so basically the work I was seeing had this kind of finish that was a consequence of the tools. And what I found is that, and this is especially important for museums, right? Because museums put in an installation and it's there for 10, 20 years. Okay, it doesn't help to have that patina. So what I found is that a better strategy is actually to mix media together, right? In ways that bridge virtual, physical, digital, okay? You're using the input of one as the output of one is the input of another. You're creating your own workflows. And from what I hear, what Roberto has told me, that's what you do on your program, right? Okay, so it sounds like you're working at a level that actually does that you won't have that problem of that patina. So yeah, for me, it was just an observation. And then, well, how do I create something that feels, I know, more visceral than this? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. How do you choose the medium? Because I think the digitally can transform and exist in many ways, in many devices, but how do you create, or how do you choose
how to present your digital content into a physical medium, in an interactive medium. How do you translate it? Do you adapt it?
Yeah, so if in the context of design work, right, working with museum design companies, it's honestly, the truth is that we work in a sort of secondary capacity to architects who define the space first, right? And so you really begin with the space and the journey that someone is going to take through that space. Because that defines the kind of scale of the interaction. It defines like the sight lines, okay? It defines what kind of intensity of activity might you have here. Should it be something, as like I was saying, that is more intimate or not? So, really, I try and work from a broad palette, right, of interactive opportunities, but to really find a scale of interaction that fits that moment. Having said that, though, clients will come to me and say, we need an iPad app, right? Or we want a big interactive floor or wall, and you do have to work with that if that is the goal. Okay, it's not like you always choose. But in the case of like designing an entire museum, the great thing about that is that you can actually it's kind of create accents, like different forms of interaction along a whole journey. Okay, and that variety is actually what creates the rich experience. As far as the artwork goes, I'm not sure if the medium chooses me or I choose it, right? It comes out of a sort of playful experimentation with materials. And I think, you know, one thing that kind of combined or unites the cube and the oil piece is that what I'm doing is I'm sort of exciting or manipulating very fine particles. Okay, I'm either using light to illuminate or magnetism to make them move. And so I think it's partly like that connection between what can the computer control, what is that connective tissue, and then I think for me, how does that enable me to do things with light, essentially, yeah. A lot of it is about sort of creating stories with light.
Okay, so thank you, Graham. Thank you for sharing with us, and welcome to Centro anytime you want. And thank you for being here and joining us today.
Thank you. Cheers.
Estar rodeada de gente creativa es lo que más hace que surja mi propia creatividad. Es una manera de pensar completamente distinta, es un lenguaje completamente distinto. Esta industria es un cambio constante. Entonces tú tienes que estar en constante aprendizaje, que es lo que a mí me gusta.
Para mí sí ha sido un cambio significativo dentro de lo que hacía a lo que hago ahora, y sobre todo que es que por fin encontré el lugar en el que quiero estar. En la actualidad hay pantallas por todos lados y realmente es como un mundo infinito para poder crear. Pues lo que más así me encanta son los conciertos y compaginar la música con el video. Es como una experiencia colectiva muy emocionante. La energía de 20,000 personas que están ahí gritando y están esperando algo que tú llevas planeando meses. Me siento bastante preparada para poder llevar a cabo de manera técnica cualquier cosa que yo quiera. Soy Abigail 5, estudié la especialidad en código creativo para animación y video en Centro.